Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Let's take you to the Money Desk now, where our eNCA business editor, Devan Murugan, is with us. So, Dev, I see the business has not welcomed the national state of disaster with open arms. Before you tell us why, perhaps just bring us in on what are the major changes under the state of disaster.
Yeah, so let's take a quick review on the salient points of this national state of disaster as declared by the president. So a couple of things. We know that we will now have an electricity minister, and that electricity or minister of electricity will be housed in the presidency, so that there is a single point of command, says the president, to deal with the crisis. Eskom still falling under, despite this portfolio, still falls under the Department of Public Enterprises and still deals with the Department of Minerals and Energy. Now, lest we forget, there's still one more minister in all of this, which is Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the Minister of Traditional Affairs and Governance. She gazetted the state of disaster and in many ways may still be overriding. Right, next point. Remember that the one other point that was brought up last night is that critical infrastructure would be exempt from power cuts. What do they include? Things like water treatment plants, hospitals. There will also be tax incentives for businesses and households that install solar panels. You spoke about that in your previous interview, but more details on exactly what those exemptions are will come from the finance minister in his budget speech. That happens later this month. All right, so the president's also telling us last night that new renewable energy projects won't face stifling regulations. Those projects can get on board sooner because the president says that the regulatory requirements would be limited on them. The president also saying last night, and this is perhaps a big one for many, that the Auditor General will be brought in to guard against any abuse of funds needed to attend to this disaster. So corruption fear is already creeping in, but President hoping that will be allayed by the Auditor General overseeing that. Now, I want to bring in very quickly the body representing organised business, Business Unity South Africa. BUSA President Bonang Mohale joins me now. Bonang, thanks indeed for your time. So, prior to the state of disaster being declared, BUSA said, and this was quite in the open, that poor governance, lack of decisive leadership, a weak state, all of that fueled this power crisis. Does last night's declaration change anything?
So for us, it changes a number of things. So we support it. We are emboldened and energized by it because it throws a spotlight, laser focus on some of the things that are keeping us awake at night. We are also getting a sense of urgency, of pace, of tempo, but also the president has been quite explicit about the few things that needs to be done. So when you look at the broad themes of this State of the Nation address about building a new consensus, growing the economy and indeed jobs, but protecting lives and livelihoods, ensuring a just energy transition, but also accelerating land reform, I think fighting, rooting out corruption, but also making communities safer, and the last one for me being making government work. So if I pick the three big things that are important to us as business, of course, is the declaration of the state of national disaster, but also the new Minister of Energy, but also restructuring the more than 734 state-owned entities and state-owned enterprises. Your specific question says, especially on the national state of disaster, straight out of the starting blocks, we don't need a state of disaster to do the things we should have done, probably in this sixth administration, but declaring it says we are serious, we are going to marshal, corral our force, impetus, energies on this one. Yep. We are concerned about two things. One is the fact that in a national state of disaster, you bypass the hard-fought freedoms by ordinary citizens, and we're hoping that that's not going to happen. Number two, it's this notion of enabling state capture, corruption, bribery, stealing and cheating. Yeah. It doesn't give us comfort as business when the president says, no, we'll rope in the Auditor General to make sure that the expenditure, as and when it happens, that there is no corruption. Remember, that's what he said. using exactly those words when we were responding to the pandemic with a 500 billion socioeconomic stimulus. But anybody who knows anything about external audits, it is looking backwards. It's like driving a car forward, looking at the rearview mirror. They audit what has already happened. Here we need to put systems and processes in place to ensure that state capture doesn't happen before it happens. Because when people have stolen the money and they've eaten it, it takes at least 10 years to prosecute them. Experience teach us that.
I want to talk about, apologies to come in there, I want to talk about that corruption concerns in a moment. Many smaller businesses, even medium businesses, watching the screen last night, and the millions of households, I'm trying to make sense of what these tax incentives really mean, because their lights need to be kept on in order to keep this economy going. I mean, there's limiting regulations for new projects. There's households saying you'll get tax incentives. How material is that for you, for this economy to recover? I mean, does it have flesh in it as you see it?
Not yet. That we're expecting from the Minister of Finance, who will then give us details. Because the State of the Nation address, by definition, is the opening of Parliament. It's addressing all three houses, but also it's about laying the plans for the next year in broad strokes. So we shouldn't expect necessarily the details, because the details come with the budget. By the way, the budget is nothing but financial figures that expresses the strategy as espoused by the president. So I think tax incentives are good because businesses the world over respond well to incentives, but they respond even better to law and order, because at the moment we are teetering on being a mafia state. And then lastly, I think ordinary South Africans need to feel safe in their own homes, in their own cars, when they stop at a traffic light at 8 o'clock in the evening. At the moment, that's not happening. So the State of the Nation address yesterday, for me, is also consistent with the 6 risks as identified by the World Economic Forum, facing specifically South Africa, because there were 10 facing the globe now, and then what these will look like in another 10 years. Here I'm talking about the state collapse, debt crisis, collapse of services and public infrastructure. I'm talking about the cost of living crisis, employment and livelihood crisis, and of course, illegal immigration. Yeah. But also the president was right by saying, I'm not going to start new things. The 5 energy crisis interventions are still relevant that are aimed at improving the performance of Eskom's existing fleet of power stations, to accelerate the procurement of new generation capacity, but also to massively increase private investment in generation capacity, but also to enable both businesses and households to invest in rooftop solar. But imagine, Devan, if every government building, every factory, every head office of every single solitary one of the almost 389 companies listed on the JSE and 1.5 million that are not listed, but every single solitary one of the service stations in the country and houses had a solar panel on their roofs, that will probably reduce our energy demand by 30 percentage points. And the sun here is free. We have 300 days of absolute sunshine. The World Authority on Solar Energy is Germany, with no more than 3 months of this sunshine. Okay. So I think the issue of accelerating the procurement of new generation capacity, of ensuring that the youth unemployment, state capture, stable, reliable, and predictable energy supply, and the lack of implementation of structural economic reforms must now be given new force, impetus, and energy by all of us, the social partners.
Now, time is against us, Mr. Bonang, but I want to ask you one more question, just a couple of seconds. The real problem that I think you guys, as part of big business, have always mentioned is that real social compact didn't materialize into real partnership. Just very quickly, under these circumstances, do you think that real partnership will materialize? Because that's been a huge stumbling block, hasn't it?
So all it needs is leadership. You know, the effect that leadership has on any organization could be up to 40%. It's about putting government, business, labor, and civil society in one room. And it's about agreeing simple things. that as business will continue to invest, we're not going on an investment boycott, that in the next 5 years we'll pay our people a living wage, that we're not going to embark on massive retrenchments. Labour needs to make a commitment to say we're not going to demand double-digit inflation because we are not internationally competitive and we're not going to go on strike, at least for 5 years. Government needs to say we are going to stop state capture, we are going to stop cheating, bribery, stealing, and indeed general corruption. We are going to put our best foot forward, the right people in the right jobs, doing the right things, not cadre deployment, because that's what got us to be where we are now. Devan?
I'm going to leave it there. Well, thanks very much indeed for those insights. That's BUSA President Bonang Mohale there, reacting to that national state of disaster regarding the power crisis. Masego, that's where I'll leave it for now.